Hello everyone, today my team conformed by Aaron Eduardo, Jocelyn Nanette, Luis Perez, Brenda Elizabeth, Aaron Isaac, and his servant, Leonardo Flores, will show you a timeline which explains the research done on the events that took place on the origin of the universe, chemical evolution, biological evolution, the evolution, its history, and evidence of the same one, the evolution of the theories, and finally the taxonomy purpose and classification of the five kingdoms.
Late 16th century, the Copernican revolution meant a radical change in the concept we had of the universe, represented by the phrase "we revolve around the sun like any other planet." From now on, astronomers will be the ones who have the right to study the universe, when, up to that moment, it was exclusively of the philosophers and theologians. 1915, Albert Einstein formulated his general theory of relativity, in which he stated that some force unknown to his time must be pushing the bodies in the opposite direction and proportional to the gravitational attraction, in such as a way as to achieve a state of equilibrium. 1922. Alexander Friedman proposed that his theory of the oscillating universe, in which at some point the attraction of the force of gravity will be greater than the force of the impulse given by the explosion, so that the universe will stop its expansion and collapse to its starting point. 1924. Edwin Hubble discovered that were more galaxies than the Milky Way, and, and devoted his efforts to calculating the distances between some of them and our own. 1927, George Lemaitre suggests the Big Bang theory. He deduced that the universe did not collapse in on itself because gravity was contracted by a more powerful force, coming from a big explosion that drives all matter from a point where it was gathered in the remote past. 98, 1928, Edwin Hubble also discovered that the stillness of the universe was a mere appearance. When observing the spectrum of light emitted by the galaxies, the most distant ones were redshift, and it is the red electromagnetic waves that are left behind, and therefore the last ones that we can see. With this, he deduced that the universe is in motion. 1948. George Gamow predicted that from the infinitely dense and hot beginning of matter, which caused the Big Bang, an immense amount of photons must have been released throughout the cosmos. This logical deduction was immediately supported and followed by Ralph Alpher and Robert Herman, who calculated the heat loss of the light emitted by the explosion from the Big Bang to the present day. 1948. Fred Hoyle, Herman Bondi, and Thomas Gold, critics of the Big Bang, proposed his theory of stationary state, suggests that as the universe expands, new matter will be created. From this new matter, new galaxies will eventually form and occupy the empty space left by the displaced galaxies. 1967. Arnold Penzias and Robert Wilson accidentally discovered the existence of the cosmic background radiation, predicted by Gamau's adjustment to the Big Bang model. In the 80s, with the help of orbiting satellites, The temperature of the cosmic background radiation was accurately measured and, and found to be almost 3 degrees Kelvin. 1981, Alan Guth, as a contribution to the Big Bang Theory, proposed his theory of the inflationary state and explained that in the initial seconds of the explosion, matter expanded exponentially.
Origin of life chemical evolution. Friedrich Waller 1828 abiotic systems performed under laboratory conditions, that is, without the intervention of living beings. Waller 1828 it marks the development of organic chemistry. Butler Poe 1861 more than 30 years later, Butterlove demonstrated the formation of sugar. Louis Pasteur in 108,092 they invalidated the theory of spontaneous generation, the 2014, and of the vital principle, and is the idea that supposes that living beings were generated in the air. In 28th century, but it was not until the early 20th century that a scientific study of the origin of life emerged as a serious formal field, thanks to the publication of The Origin of Life by the Russian biochemist Alexander Ivanov Oparin.
Hi, this is Life Origin Biological Evolution. Okay, 1620, Van Helmont published a recipe for production mice with used underwear and with sets to give new life. 1668, Frances already discovers that the worms and grit and the meat will later be developed from flea eggs. 2676, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, Dutch merchants who discovered microscopic life. 1809, Jean Baptiste Lamarck published his famous zoological philosophy. 1859, Foster works on the spontaneous theory. Jimenez disproved it. 1871, Charles Darwin dictates the species do not remain static over time. They evolve. Natural selection is the mechanism that enables evolution.
In 1831, Charles Darwin traveled the world on a British Navy ship. This 5-year journey provided Darwin with a series of unique experiences. In Argentina, he identified what he suspected to an undescribable species of American ostrich. He also discovered 3 fossil specimens that turned out to be species new to science. In Galapagos, he obtained the best evidence for evolution. They were a variety of bird species called finches with a similar size and morphology. When he returned home in 1836, the specialist showed him that he had scent of a total of 13 species of finches never before described. For Darwin, these species were indicative of something else, of a natural phenomenon that seemed to favor the education of each species in the environment, depending on this way of thinking. In 1838, he prematurely came up with the idea of natural selection. For Darwin, the members of any species were all different, and they found themselves competing with each other for their food, which was scarce. These fights would cause only some individuals with superior characteristics to survive the context for life. Thus, the theory explaining the adaptation of species to the environment. This would explain why there were 13 different species of midges. Starting in 1855, he began to write a book to postulate that theory. In the summer of 1858, Darwin received a letter from Alfred Wallace, a naturalist who had similar travel experiences to his, but in Brazil and Malaysia. This naturalist visualized a type of selection between species that compete for environmental resources that he would leave standing only the most adapted ones. Wallace related this idea to Darwin in a letter, who, without really perceiving the difference between his ideas, hastened to finish writing the book he had started.
1859, Darwin publishes The Origin of the Species. 1882, Charles Darwin dies.
Taxonomy. The most ancient discipline of biologic sciences has the objectives of knowing, describing, and classifying the diverse objects of the natural world as living things, rocks, and minerals. This is concentrated exclusively classifying them in hierarchical groups. Its purpose is to order and classify biological species to form inclusive groups, always based on the peculiarities of their homologous characters. Taxonomists are specialists in the morphology, organic functions, habits, geographical distribution, and other aspects of living beings of one or more biological groups. They observe and analyze examples of specimens of the living things they capture for their study or are deposited in the cabinets of natural history, in the herbaria, or in museums. Also, they have described a little more than 1 million species. Aristotle created the first system of scientific classification by ordering the diversity of known animals in two groups, animus, that means with red blood, and animus, without red blood. In the Middle Ages, there were some catalogs of animals, called bestiaries, that ordered species alphabetically. Other forms of classifying was based on a very evident characteristic: those that fly, those that are edible, those that produce venom, and others. In the 18th century, Latin and Greek languages became the official tongues of the classification of species. Linnaeus set the rules of the designing fixed name to species. First, he determined that species would be ordered in hierarchical categories: kingdom, class, order, gender, and species. Later, family and phylum were added into the categories. He also created a code of binomial nomenclature. The first name would be made reference to the genus category, while the second would be a descriptive of the species. On 19th century, Lamarck based on the presence or absence of a spinal column and cranium, vertebrates with red blood and invertebrates with blood of other colors. Also, the 5 kingdoms of life. When the 19th century arrived, the only differentiation was animals from plants, which constituted a system of 2 natural kingdoms. Some scientists suggested that microbes could be small animals, and others that they could be miniature plants. So they gave microbes their own place. In 1866, Herschel created a system of 3 kingdoms and designated the name Protista, for all unicellular organisms. He discovered 2 main types, drusos and bacteria. So he placed bacteria in a subdivision called Monera. The cells without nucleus, which he called prokaryotes. In 1939, Herbert Copeland performed a relatively obvious and predictable maneuver of Haeckel's proposal. He separated bacteria from the Protista, creating for them the 4th kingdom of cells without organs, the Monera. In 1959, Robert Whittaker notably argued about the reality hidden from the sight of all biologists, a subgroup of species macroscopic and others microscopic, not photosynthetical, localized between the plants were not plants but fungi, the fifth kingdom of life which he called fungi. Well, now, Monera or bacteria. All living beings that lack its cellular nucleus and organelles, it contains all bacteria, microscopic and unicellular. Their nutrition forms are autotroph or heterotroph. The reproductive form is strictly asexual. Plantae. All plants and their immediate evolutive antecessors, the green algae. The differentiation of tissues and organs. They are autotrophic for performing photosynthesis through leaves and stem. Their way of life is without movement, presents mainly sexual reproduction and forms of asexual reproduction. Fungi. Microscopic unicellular species such as yeasts, pluricellular such as mosses, and multicellular such as mushrooms and fungi. They are heterotrophs. Microscopic fungi are sessile, while pluricellular and unicellular fungi, they don't present locomotion structures, move by sliding on surfaces. Animalia. They are organisms formed by nucleated cells. They are heterotroph. They are all multicellular. The only differentiation of tissues which form organs in which they perform their vital functions. All are sensitive, irritable, and reactive due to a nervous system. It creates movement and allows them to perceive their surroundings having organs and sense, mostly sexual reproduction. The three domains. In 1977, Carl Russ studied the sequences of nucleotides of genes originating from a diversity of species representing all kingdoms. He studied the genes of RNA that are found in the ribosomes because he was sure that synthesis of proteins was so ancient and indispensable, he included methane-producing bacteria. He discovered that the methanogen sequences were very different. This discovery encouraged Russ to discover for other groups. He also discovered other organisms without a nucleus that live at high temperatures in hydrothermal chimneys of the bottom of the sea. Russ resumed the challenges that nature shows him and declared the separation of bacteria of his newly discovered archaea, and the existence of a new taxonomic category superior of that of kingdom the domain. Bacteria, archaea, and eukarya are the phylogenetic tree of life. Lynn Margulis, in collaboration with Carlin Schwartz, they published a book titled The Five Kingdoms, was made of the archaeas and his proposal of the three domains. Margulis and Schwartz understood that they had to make at least a little space for them in the system of the five kingdoms. They called the superkingdom and the prokaryote superkingdom, and eukaryote or eukaryote superkingdom. They left a single kingdom of organisms without nucleus, the Monera or bacteria. They created two subkingdoms called Eubacteria and Archaeobacteria.